Welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining. Really excited to hear all about your experience, former Harvard Law admissions. Tell us a little bit about your time there.
Yeah, so I worked at Harvard Law School for 12 years, from 2001 now I have to do math, 2013. I started off as an assistant director of admissions and worked my way up to director of admissions. And it was a wonderful experience working at a really fantastic school with a great group of people, some of whom now work at Spivey Consulting.
Sure. Oh, that's amazing. Wow. So when did you leave Harvard and go over to Spivey?
So in 2013, Mike and I have known each other for close to 20 years now. And Mike had told me that he started Spivey Consulting, and we were chit-chatting about stuff just because we're friends. And I thought that it sounded like a really great opportunity. And so I made the switch and left a very steady job for something that was a little uncertain. But Mike and I both knew that it was a really good start to a really good business, and we could help a lot of people and really dispel a lot of myths about the application process, because from the other side, it's not transparent. So and we saw a lot of misinformation out there. So I joined Mike, and in the beginning it was just the two of us, and then we added Derek Meeker, and then it's grown since then.
So you left Harvard, you said, in 2013, which is before the recent changes with the Harvard Law and then many other schools taking the GRE. So I take that you weren't involved in that decision.
So I was there when we started talking about the GRE. I was very preliminarily started to discuss what other ways we could look at a test for applicants. So I was there at the very beginning, but I wasn't there when it was actually implemented.
So what, if you could just share a little bit, what led to that decision initially? Because I mean, Harvard obviously isn't hard up for applications the way that some of the lower tier schools may be.
Yeah, well, so I think there definitely was a time. It's not that anyone's hard up for applications, but applications did drop, and that was seen at all levels. So it was noticeable at Harvard. I was there from 2001 to 2013, so there definitely were highs and lows during that point. So application volume is always an issue no matter where you are. But that wasn't necessarily the main motivator. I think that's always, who else can we get to attract? Do we have to have people take the LSAT? So a lot of joint degrees, and this is a motivation that I think a lot of other schools have, is that, there are plenty of really, really talented people who are applying to master's programs with a GRE, but don't necessarily have the LSAT and are interested in law school. So offering the GRE as an option for the standardized test gave those people a chance to apply to law school without having to go through the process of taking the LSAT. So it is a little bit more about giving access to people and making it more accessible to apply to law school. I think that was definitely part of the motivation, but always part of the motivation at any school is going to be looking at increasing applications. I mean, it's just part of what we do in admissions is how can we get more applications?
Sure. Now, what sorts of applicants would you say are a good fit to take the GRE only versus those taking the LSAT only? And when would you recommend someone taking both?
So I'll start with that last question. I wouldn't recommend somebody taking both, only because the LSAT and the way that the rules are right now, the LSAT is king or queen, however you want to describe it. But it is the most familiar test to law school admissions professionals. They know it, they understand it, they know what to do with it, and it's very, very familiar to them. And if you have an LSAT score, that's what's going to be reported to the ABA. So that's the way that things stand right now. I think down the road, things may change, but anecdotally, what I've seen is that people who are really strong candidates, in my opinion, from what I've seen, are not getting the same love from law schools as they would if they had a similar percentile rank in an LSAT score. So, I think that the GRE is a good choice for people who either know that they don't want to take the LSAT, they either already have a really strong GRE score, or they think they'll do better on the GRE than the LSAT. But the bottom line is that law school admissions offices, law school admissions folks are just more familiar with the LSAT and what to do with it. And I think that will change over time as more and more people with GRE scores apply to law school, and more schools will accept the GRE. But at this stage, I think that the LSAT really is the one, and we're only a few years into it. So I think that's to be expected in some ways. But I wouldn't always encourage people to take the GRE over the LSAT, just because of the anecdotal results that I've seen with applicants this year and the previous year.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And of course, there is the mysterious black box of the U.S. News rankings, how they may consider GRE scores. Right.
Exactly. So GRE scores are reported to the ABA. U.S. News may change the way that they look at it, and schools just won't know that until it happens.
Right. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your time at Harvard reviewing applications. I'm wondering, obviously, Harvard's one of the most highly selective schools there is. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that many of the applications you were evaluating were top quality. What were some of those edge cases where one little thing made the difference in terms of a yes or a no?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And I think one of the things that people have a hard time wrapping their head around and understanding is how ridiculously talented the applicant pool was or is at Harvard, and how much that didn't change from year to year. So as I mentioned earlier, that the applications did ebb and flow here and there over the course of my time there. The quality never really fluctuated that much. So the number of applications changed, but the quality of applications really stayed quite high. And what I mean by that is that there are plenty of people with really strong numbers who apply to Harvard, but it really was the whole application that was looked at. I mean, I don't say that to be Pollyanna-ish about it and say that, the numbers don't matter, because of course they do. You're applying to an academic program, and the two biggest predictors of your academic success are your GPA and your LSAT score, now the GRE too, but mostly the GPA and the LSAT score. So of course the numbers matter. But there were always compelling cases. There were always people who Harvard could take a chance on because they had enough people to fill those gaps with those really high numbers. And so the people who had the amazing story and can share a really wonderful perspective that is, and I hate to use the word unique because it's just so overused, but really share a unique perspective, something that's really different. So the personal stories were by far, with a strong academic background, that made a big difference. People who have overcome a lot, or people who really have a different perspective to share, that really made a big difference. I also think focus makes a big difference, and maturity. So focus in the fact that, somebody who is really passionate about something, and another overused word is passionate, but still appropriate, but somebody who's really feels strongly about a cause and has followed through with that. So somebody who has done a lot of work for, an organization that they feel very strongly about, and that's what they want to continue on in their legal career. So people with that kind of focus, like this wasn't just a Elle Woods moment, I think I'll go to law school, but really well thought out plan to go to law school. And then the maturity factor is also important. Somebody who can bring experience, somebody with work experience, but really it's not just a tunnel vision since they were a child wanting to go to law school. They've really got some experience and understood exactly what it means to go to law school and to invest in the time, the money, the energy into a law degree, and what that means on the back end as well.
Well, thanks for breaking that down into those different categories. I'm wondering if you could maybe share an example, and you can anonymize details, of course, but any examples within any of those categories of applicants you can think of where maybe they didn't have the numbers, but there was some compelling story that led you to take a chance on them.
Yeah. So, and by the way that that the admissions decisions are made at Harvard, at least when I was there, it wasn't just one person. There was always an admissions committee that that collectively decided. And it's done a little bit differently now, but when I was there, the faculty had a vote. So we would recommend people to be admitted, but the faculty had the final say. So the faculty could say yes or no. So it was never, I mean, we could always push or advocate for somebody, but it was never just one person making the decision. I'm trying, there were a couple of people that I remember just being really, the odds were stacked against them. I think poverty is something that is hard to overcome, and it's hard to get to law school, never mind an elite legal education, when you start out poor. And so those cases, and there were several cases of people who really had a difficult upbringing, who worked incredibly hard against all odds to bring themselves to where they were, and their natural talent, their grit, really helped them shine. And they took advantage of every opportunity that was given to them, and they're change makers. So I think those are kind of the cases that I think of when I think of people who made a difference. And then I guess also with the maturity level, there were several people who law school was their second career. And so I remember there were at least one or two medical doctors who applied to law school. And I just found that fascinating. And of course they were brilliant, so that didn't hurt. But they had very good reasons for wanting to switch careers. And you can, there were plenty of other categories of people who went in one direction for a very long time and then completely changed their mind to want to go to law school, and had good reason to. And so those are other cases that I thought were really interesting as well.
That is very interesting. So I gather from that someone doesn't necessarily have to have legal work experience or a legal background, but you do want them to have a compelling reason for why they're choosing to go to law school now.
Exactly. And it's the same thing that we talk to people who are applying to law school now. You don't have to have legal experience before going to law school. You just have to have a really good reason to why you want to go to law school. And you need to be able to articulate why you want to go to law school, and not just because it seems like, it would be a good fit. Beyond that, what are the reasons? Why do you want to go to law school? So being able to express that through your application materials, I think is really important.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Now, what about addenda? When do you recommend someone writes an addendum? When do you recommend they not write an addendum? And I'm thinking in particular of low GPA or low LSAT score, or maybe someone might feel compelled simply because they don't have work experience.
Right. So I don't think the lack of work experience is a compelling reason to write an addendum, but certainly a GPA or an LSAT addendum, there are gray areas. There's not, it's not cut and dry when you should write one and when you shouldn't. So let's start with the GPA. So if the GPA, if you have it depends on what your reason is. Let's start there. So with the GPA, it really depends on what your reason is and what you want to tell the admissions committee. My general rule of thumb with addenda is to keep them very brief. So we don't want to have an essay explaining every detail of why your GPA is what it is. Let's say, for example, you were a biology major when you started and you were planning to go to med school, and you took organic chemistry and got a C, and then you decided that, which is probably pretty average for organic chemistry, but then you decided that, maybe I don't think the sciences are my thing, and you switched to another major that is more fitting for your interests. So, you go on, your freshman GPA is not great, but the rest of the 3 years are pretty good. All you need is like 3 sentences saying that you had really, you had a heart-to-heart with yourself at the end of your freshman year and decided to change majors. You embraced your English major or your poli-sci major or history or whatever it is. And then you decided that, it was much better suited for your interests and future goals. That's it. You really don't need more than that. The law school admissions officers will see your transcript, but they'll also get something from LSAC that's really, really helpful to them when they're looking at grade trends. So you're going to see not only your overall GPA, but they'll get a breakdown of year to year. And so they'll be able to very, very easily see your grade trends. And so if there's an upward trend, they'll be able to see it. They could always flip to the page that has the transcript, and they'll be able to see that you took biology and organic chemistry, and then you took a bunch of other courses after that. So that will be almost obvious to them, but it's still helpful for you to write a very brief addendum to point that out. If it depends on what your reason is. So if there are other reasons, if there are more personal reasons that you had a tough semester, you had some personal crisis happen, you can explain a little bit of that, but the addendum is not meant to be another essay. Of course, if there's relevant information that you think is helpful to the admissions committee to make a decision, then you should include it. But keep in mind that you're talking to, some strangers who are really looking at your application and whether or not you're a good fit for their school. So you want to take a step back, and it's difficult sometimes for applicants to take a step back from their application and look at it and say, if I weren't me, if I didn't know me, would I have questions about this? Would I have questions about my GPA? Would I have questions about my LSAT score? And if the answer is yes, then you would want to submit an addendum. And so for the LSAT score, some schools actually require an explanation if you've taken it more than once. So it's important to know what each school's individual requirements are. But you could write a very brief addendum if the marching band was playing outside during your first take, or that you were really sick and you should have canceled. Those things, again, a few sentences are fine. You do not need to go into the strategy that you used for each individual LSAT. The schools don't care about that. They really don't care if you use this way of studying or you did this way of studying, or even sometimes what your practice tests were. You don't need to go into very specific details about what you were scoring on your practice tests. It's pretty typical for people to score a few points below their practice tests during their actual test. So that's kind of a given. But if you have to retake, a very simple, I got, a 1-2-3 on my, not a 123, but like XYZ on my first take. I knew that I had performed better on my practice test. I knew I could do better. So I retook it in February and received this score. I believe that this is a more accurate representation of my capabilities or something like that. Period. That's it. That's all you need to know. Addendums for other things, I think, are dictated mostly by what the school requires. So if you had a leave of absence, or if you took some time off, or if you had some character and fitness issues, those are usually dictated by the questions that are asked on the application. So definitely follow the rules on that.
Yeah. I want to get to the character and fitness in a moment, but before I do, I'm glad you brought up the idea of retaking, because my intuition is that given that the LSAT is being offered more and more frequently now, I'm wondering if that will impact how admission officers view retakes.
So it's a fair question. I think that is a slow move to happen. Change isn't always easy for people. And that's not specific to admissions officers. That's just people.
Yeah.
So the fact that it is, it's given more often and it gives more opportunities for retake, because it used to be that you could only take it 3 times within 2 years, and now that's lifted. So it is easier for people to retake now, but I don't think that that is licensed to take it as many times as you want. I think that it's still a really good idea to keep it. The ultimate goal is to take it once and just be done with it. I think that should still always be the goal. Easier said than done. I get it. I'm not the one who has to take it. So it's okay to retake. It's totally okay to retake, but I wouldn't plan on taking it 6 times. It's just not a good plan A. Plan A should always be, let's take it once, and if I need to retake it, I'll take it again. So I would say the school will always, there's very few guarantees in admissions, but I can guarantee at this day and age, with the rules the way they are, that the school will always report the highest LSAT score to the ABA. That's just, it would be ridiculous to think otherwise. What schools do with the information, they look at all scores, they get access to all scores, do they average it? Averaging it is kind of a different topic, but every school will get all of the scores, and every school will look at all of those scores. They're just going to get it, and they're not going to ignore it. Every school will look at it and get those scores. So there is a difference between taking it twice and taking it 6 times. A cancel is a cancel, and cancels don't matter. 1 cancel is fine. Even 2 cancels, I think, is fine. But if you have, 5 or 6 cancels, then it's probably an indication of something else going on that may raise some questions for the admissions office. It doesn't mean that you're doomed. Please don't think that you're doomed, but it is something that may be indicative of something else. So the goal is to try to take it as few times as possible for everyone's sanity, I think. But it's not the end of the world if you have to retake it. And actually, it's a good idea to retake it if you got your score back and you didn't do well and you could do better. Then you absolutely should retake it. And there's no downside to retaking it. Besides the fact that you actually have to retake it.
Take it again, yeah.
But in terms of the retake is fine. It's a gray area, I would say, after about 4 takes, not including cancels. But I would say it starts to be a gray area. Now, your question was, will schools start to relax the way they feel about that? I don't know. I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon. I think that regardless of whether individuals see it as okay, it still should be the goal to take it as few times as you possibly can.
Sure. Yeah. Nobody wants to be taking it several times. Yeah.
Wants to put themselves through that, right?
Yeah. Nobody wants to. But as you said, 4 takes could be an upper limit plus maybe 1 or 2 cancellations.
Yeah.
You could reach up to 6 registrations.
Yeah.
I don't want that as a plan A.
I never want to say an exact cutoff.
Yeah.
Everyone's circumstances are different, and it's not cut and dry. It starts to get gray, I would say, around that.
Yeah. What about, just to stay on this for 1 more minute, just to change direction a little bit, the digital LSAT that's happening this year. I imagine that the July LSAT, of course, people are going to be more likely to cancel because they get a free retake if they do. And that raises a lot of questions for applicants about maybe the format being different, the style they take it in being different. So that I see as being a factor, at least during this transitional year, that could lead to more takes as well.
It could. And I think the free cancel on the July test it's amazing. Like, I never thought that I would see that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
like it's a real, I think if anyone has, maybe I'll take the test, take the July test, register for it. It's a freebie. Well, it's not literally free, but
you get a free credit towards a future take. Store credit with LSAC.
Right. And you can see what your score would be like in test conditions. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how many people cancel the July test. But I think it's wonderful. I think it's a really good way to get people to try the digital test or test market them or use them as guinea pigs or whatever you want to say. I think it's a good incentive to do that. With the digital test, I think, again, change is hard. So there are going to be some people who are going to have a hard time with it because they're used to the paper. But it's inevitable. It has to be. It has to go in that direction for 2019.
Come on already. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to circle back to this character and fitness question. I mean, obviously, we know disclosing is always the answer, but what about those edge cases? Are there certain edge cases you see in your work with applicants now or back when you were at Harvard where it's like kind of unclear whether someone should disclose or how much should they share?
Yeah, so I always fall on the side of disclose, because you never want to be in a position where you should have disclosed and you didn't. That could get you in so much more trouble. I guess it also depends on what the offense is, but if it's something really innocuous, like, I say it is innocuous for an admissions standpoint, but like underage drinking or even, a noise violation in a college dorm, these youthful indiscretions are meaningless in the grand scheme of things. If there's one of them, if there's a series of them, that's a different story. So, if you had one violation, you were written up about something, in the college dorm, you had a toaster in your room and you weren't supposed to have a toaster or something like that. Nobody's going to care for admissions standpoints. But if you did like a million other things, then it would become an issue. So if, you were written up, but you're not sure if it's part of your college record, you call the school and the school says, we have no recording of that, but you distinctly remember getting a warning, disclose it. It's not going to affect your admissions if it's something really silly and juvenile like that. That is actually something that I've seen a lot of lately, is colleges not keeping records anymore and getting students getting advice from pre-law advisors saying, oh, there's no record of it, so don't disclose it. Even though it did happen, the school is not asking on the character and fitness question whether or not there's a record of it. They're asking if it happened. So it's really important to pay attention to the question that's asked in the character and fitness question and answer it honestly. And if there's a gray area, I would say 9 times out of 10, the right decision is to disclose, to over disclose.
I would imagine that also there's cases where maybe you call the school, they say there's no record. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe there is a record somewhere.
Right. If you have a record of it and you remember like having to do community service hours for your, public urination or whatever, I don't know. These are things that happen. Yeah, that's probably a bad example, but people do things and they regret them later. That's human nature. It's just, people make bad decisions, but it doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that your application is going to be affected by a silly thing that you did when you were in college. The silly thing is a gray area for some people, but it really is. I think for the most part, it really makes more sense to disclose than to ignore it, because that is exactly what happens. Is that people are calling the school saying, I know that I was written up for moving a couch out of the common room into my room. I know that I did that. I know that I had to do community service work for that. And then the school says, there's no record of it. You do not need to disclose that. The school is wrong if the application says, were you ever, did you ever receive disciplinary action?
Right.
For something? That's the question that's asked. So it's so important to pay attention to the question that's asked and really, truly, honestly answer the character and fitness questions that's asked on the application.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. Now, I'm wondering, similar to the addenda question, what is the proper tone? What's the proper length?
Yeah.
What's the proper level of detail to go into on each of these sorts of things?
Right. So you need to give enough information that they understand what it was. You do not need to give you don't need to give too much information. So there's a fine line, I think, because I think brevity is important, but you need the facts. With the tone, you absolutely need to take responsibility for your action. You cannot blame your roommate. You cannot blame, somebody else. You need to take responsibility. That it goes to the whole maturity factor of it. So, we'll go back to the moving the couch out of the common room. In that kind of an explanation, you would say, in June of 2016, my roommates and I were, caught moving a couch out of the common room. We were written up by our RA and needed to perform 10 hours of community service or whatever it was. So you say the offense, you say what it was, what happened, what the result was, and then you say something like, I realize that this is, was a poor decision that I made, but, I learned my lesson. Although, you don't want to be trite with you don't want to say something that's kind of cheesy, but I realized that this was that I was breaking the rules, and I fully accept responsibility for my actions, or something like that. But that's all you need. You don't need to say, my roommate Steve was really the one in charge, and I was just going along in the room. You just keep it simple, but you need to include all of the facts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you don't need to say, I understand the severe importance of not moving couches. Like,
right. Exactly. You don't need to go into, I realized that I was taking school property and that's wrong. You call it what it was, and it's a silly, a lapse of judgment, a ridiculous mistake. And if it's more embarrassing, like, something that really is embarrassing, you can say in the addendum, I am embarrassed to be disclosing this right now. Mm-hmm. It's fine. I mean, I think you should be if it is embarrassing, but you're taking responsibility for some, poor decision that you made, and we've all made them. You just got caught.
Right. Exactly. All right. So just so we can end on a lighter note that's not related to character and fitness, just the personal statement itself.
Yeah.
Common mistakes. Does it need to cover why you want to go to law school? Anything else you want to share on that?
So the personal statement I see in many ways is kind of the heart of the application. I mean, besides the fact, whether or not you're academically qualified, this is who you are. This tells a lot about you, and it gives your chance to tell the admissions committee things about you that they can't find from the rest of your application. So when they're looking at your application, they're going to see, your grades, your transcript, your recommendations, your resume. So they'll see a lot of information. The personal statement is your chance to tell them, what else is there about you? What should they know? What should they know about you? And what do you want to highlight? So, there's so many directions that it can go in, but keep in mind that the personal statement is not looked at in a vacuum. No element of the application is looked at in a vacuum. It's all looked at the same time. So while the personal statement doesn't necessarily need to describe why you want to go to law school, your application as a whole needs to make sense that you're applying, that it's a law school application and not just business school or undergrad. Your application as a whole just needs to make sense why you're applying to law school. So keep that in mind, but the why law category of personal statements is usually not the most interesting thing about the applicant. So sometimes it is, and sometimes that is a perfectly good topic for a personal statement. But think about all the things, if you had 5 minutes with an admissions officer, just a chat, what would you want them to know about you? And think of all those things, those characteristics that you have. It doesn't have to be your skills. I think that's one of the mistakes that people make, is that they feel like they have to show off their skills in a personal statement, where that's not the place for it, really. It's your experience, it's who you are, it's what your perspective is, it's how you came to the decision to go to law school, if that makes sense. But it's, the personal characteristics that make you who you are. Are you somebody, and my go-to example of that is problem solver, because most people who are going to law school are problem solvers, because that's kind of what lawyers do. And so, you're not going to write a personal statement saying, I'm a problem solver, but instead you'll tell a story about a time that you solved a simple or a complex problem. So it's those personal characteristics that you have that you want to highlight in your personal statement. It's not meant to be an easy exercise. So it's a really difficult thing for people to come up with the right topic. And then, of course, you have to write it. But I think this is a place where you want to highlight your strengths, highlight the characteristics that make you who you are, and, keep a positive attitude.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that detailed breakdown. I love that you're saying it's not necessarily why law school. It's just meant to be personal. That's what it is. It's a personal statement, not a why law school statement.
Right.
But
the other thing I will say there, though, is that you really need to pay attention to the prompts, because there are some schools who have very specific prompts for their personal statements. So pay attention to what the school is asking for as well.
So do you find then that applicants typically aren't always able to reuse the same statement for multiple schools?
No, they usually can. They usually can reuse the same statement. I mean, the people that I work with are able to use the same statement. From my experience on this side of things, that we're usually able to use the same statement. Sometimes the length will differ depending on the school, but the content, the heart of it is usually the same.
Well, that's a great transition to actually the next and last thing I wanted to cover with you, which is your work with applicants at Spivey. How do you work with folks on the personal statement as well as other parts of the application?
Yeah, so I really get to know my clients when I work with them. When I was at Harvard Law School, there's a lot that I loved about my job in admissions. I loved being director of admissions. I loved, so many things about there. But I used to call people to tell them that they were admitted, and so that was fun. Wow. But I have to say that when my clients are admitted, it's more fun. It's so much more rewarding because I really get to know them, and I help them with elements of their application. It's all their work, and I don't take credit for their success. It is their success, so I just help guide them and point them in the right direction here and there. So working with clients on personal statements, helping them choose the right topic, pushing them in different directions, and then really just being there to answer questions about the process as well. So I couldn't have asked for a better way to spend my days.
Wonderful. No, it sounds like a great job. So you're helping them with all the written parts of the application as well as strategies in terms of selecting schools or what to talk about and why?
Yep. So, it's all their written work, but I do help them with editing and kind of pushing in different directions and challenging them to make sure that they're really showcasing their best qualities, but also just being there as a resource for questions about the process as a whole and how they fit into it, what their chances are here, how they should go about this or that, and really just helping guide them through the process.
Excellent. Well, Karen, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all your advice with everyone today. What's the best way for folks to reach you if they have follow-up questions or they want to work with you?
The best way to reach us is through our email address at info@spiveyconsulting.com.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely encourage folks to reach out and get in contact with you. Karen, thanks so much again. This was really a pleasure.
Thank you so much.